Good morning, everybody. Good morning, early birds, I should say. Welcome to the opening session of the HXA conference this morning. I'm Nadine Strawson. I'm a member of HXA's advisory board, and very pertinent to this panel, I also am a senior fellow with FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. So I'm especially happy to moderate this panel, which features three superb FIRE staff members. I've been closely engaged with FIRE ever since it was founded, before some of my panelists were born, 26 years ago. And some of you may know when FIRE was originally founded, it had the same acronym, but it stood for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, in education. A couple of years ago, given the increasing attacks on free speech from across the political spectrum in the United States, FIRE, after serious deliberation and consultation, and with my and many people's enthusiastic support, expanded its mission. It still is very focused, and I would say by far the leading exponent of free speech, academic freedom, due process, other core rights on campus. And it is also a leading supporter through litigation and other strategies of freedom of expression beyond campus. So I'm so grateful for these unique contributions that FIRE makes, which should also be of common concern to all of us who are involved in HXA. A key component of FIRE's special work and why it has been so influential in affecting college and university policies for the better is because of its path-breaking data gathering and data-driven reports, which have earned a lot of attention, not only on campus, but also in the media and among the general public. I'm sure all of you have regularly seen references to FIRE's rankings of college and universities. I think Harvard and certain members of Congress did FIRE a big favor during those notorious hearings a couple of years ago, when suddenly everybody knew that Harvard was at the very bottom of the 245 campuses that FIRE had rated that year. And that, of course, creates incentives for other universities and Harvard itself to revise policies, working together with these FIRE experts to upgrade its ranking. So we want all of you to leave this session with tangibles that you can use in your own advocacy and reform efforts, with useful data, strategies, and some folks you can talk to for additional assistance. I'm going to briefly introduce our three impressive panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. Sean Stevens is FIRE's Chief Research Advisor. He directs the College Free Speech Rankings and the National Speech Index. Sean earned his PhD in social psychology from Rutgers University in 2013 and previously was the research director at Heterodox Academy, where he originally developed the Campus Expression Survey. In fact, for all of us who had the privilege of watching John Tomasi's great opening address yesterday, we learned or were reminded that Sean is one of the founding fathers of HXA. You saw that nice slide with an even younger looking Sean. Okay, our next speaker will be Nathan Honeycutt, who is a research fellow and manager of polling and analytics at FIRE. Nate's research focuses on higher education and political bias, and he leads FIRE's survey studies of college and university faculty. Along with Sean, Nate also earned a PhD from Rutgers University, in his case, psychology. Nate is a founder and active member of the Society for Open Inquiry in Behavioral Science. Laura Beltz is FIRE's Director of Policy Reform. She heads a team that works with colleges and universities to implement changes to their policies and practices to better protect free expression. Laura earned her JD, Juris Doctor, at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and while there, she interned with FIRE and the National Constitution Center. So, let's start with you, Sean, founding daddy. Please tell us about FIRE's college free speech rankings, what they are, how they're calculated, and how they can encourage and galvanize pro-free speech reform.
Thanks, Nadine. Okay, it's on. So the story of FIRE's college free speech rankings probably goes back even further than the 6 years we've been doing them for. As Nadine mentioned, FIRE was founded in the late 90s. I do think Nate was born at that point, though, actually. Was pretty young, I think, but I do think he was born. So a lot of experience with cases on campus, with seeing issues with speech for students and faculty, but also a little bit of an element of somewhat screaming into the void, or shouting out loud in a room by yourself is probably how Greg felt, because anytime you try to kind of really make the point that I think is taken for granted at a conference like this at this point, that there are serious problems with speech on most of our college and university campuses, you get the skepticism and the pushback of, well, all you really have is like anecdotal evidence. So you have this case at this university, and you have that case at this university, and this over here at this college. But how big is this problem really, or how serious is this problem, when all you can do is kind of talk about like this individual here and that individual over there? And in some ways, that criticism is a little valid. It certainly applies to, John Tomasi in his opening remarks yesterday mentioned kind of the exaggerations or some of the hyperbolic criticisms made of colleges and universities from politicians and pundits. To make their point, they often bring on a student or faculty member who's been targeted. So basically, FIRE cases or cases FIRE could have taken. And it's easy to dismiss the thing as a larger problem when all you have are those kind of personal experiences. Even though they're very compelling, people will dismiss it as you don't have a lot of data on this. So the rankings grew out of that problem that FIRE was facing, and as a way of more largely quantifying what we're seeing in our day-to-day work on campus. And so the reason they're survey-based is that now we're getting the experiences of students, and lots of students. We survey tens of thousands of students every year. Nate can tell you about faculty and their attitudes. They're a bit tougher to survey, a little bit ornery, and maybe not so willing to participate, certainly not willing to participate every year like some of the students are. But I think now, as we're about to go into releasing our sixth year's rankings in the fall, I think we have a lot of data. We've surveyed close to 300,000 college students, undergraduates, since 2020. And in some ways, the findings are fairly consistent and pretty discouraging. And in some cases, there are some signs of improvement at places. But in general, we find the pattern of, large portions of students express being uncomfortable discussing their political views in various different settings on campus. This could be publicly, in the classroom, in the dining hall, in front of a professor. It could be in private, in a written assignment, in emails, things like that. The frequency of self-censorship is fairly high. You have about 25% of students saying they're doing so at least a couple times a week. This follows being given a very clear definition of what we mean by self-censorship. Some of our earlier surveys, the first few years, we kind of had a more implicit way of asking about it. I mean, it correlated very well and seemed to really be getting at how often students were engaged in this. But a criticism was, well, you don't actually know. Maybe they're just being nice. Maybe they're being polite. Maybe they don't know enough about the topic. They're nervous, etc. So what we started doing in year 3 was giving a very clear definition and basically saying, this, you're doing this because you fear social consequences, professional consequences, and examples of things like you could be fired, you could be expelled, people might even get violent with you. So making it clear that they're self-censoring out of fear of consequence for what they said. So, you know, now there's a good amount of data. I'd say that the problem, that there is a problem. I think people acknowledge it. I think that the aftermath of October 7th and what's happened the past almost 2 years now on campuses has really awoken a lot of the skeptics of our work. For the first time, I feel like ever, in the 10 years of collecting data on this, both between being at Heterodox Academy and at FIRE, we found liberal students saying that they were very concerned about the security of free speech rights on their campus in larger percentages than conservative students. That's concerning, but I also think, as John was mentioning yesterday, an indicator of an opportunity. The majority of students on campus identify as politically left of center and liberal, so if they are now concerned about the issue, there's a possibility to make some inroads there. In terms of the rankings, just to give a brief kind of quick overview, because the methodology is a little complicated, and sometimes when it's covered in the press, I think some of the details get glossed over. The majority of the rankings come from the student survey responses, so it's based on their experiences. We then further adjust school scores based on how they handle speech controversies on their campuses. So we maintain 3 databases on our website. One is called the Campus Deplatforming database. Then we have Scholars Under Fire and Students Under Fire. The latter was recently launched and released in May. The deplatforming database tracks attempts to get speakers canceled, have play performances canceled, artwork removed. Schools can lose points if they revoke an invitation, if an event is disrupted, if students attempt to disrupt an event but fail. These can all result in loss of points for the university. If they have a strong response to it, if they prevent the shout down, if they refuse to disinvite a speaker and make a very clear, strong statement in support of the First Amendment, they can earn points, so they can gain points. There's a bonus for being strong on these things. Scholars and Students Under Fire are similar, except that they are just tracking kind of what's in their name. So Scholars is faculty members, PhD students, research fellows, postdocs. A lot of them get targeted for their research, things they've published in op-eds. It's not always things that they say on social media, although that's pretty common too. And then students as individual students, graduate students who aren't in PhD programs, and student organizations. And so the same thing applies if faculty are terminated, suspended, investigated, schools can lose points. If they resist those demands and make strong statements, they can gain points. Same for the students. We also give bonuses. This year we're introducing bonuses for schools that adopt institutional neutrality and will have endorsed the Chicago principles. So these are all ways of, effectively the rankings can be seen a little bit of like a carrot and stick in terms of our relationship with these schools. No one likes to rank badly. They get mad, might even really kind of go at us for like, there's really no point in ranking schools, like why are you doing this? And kind of the point of ranking them is like, yeah, if you rank badly, you're going to want to do better. And the easiest way to improve is reforming policies, and Laura will tell you kind of more about that. But reforming your speech code policies so that you earn a green light from FIRE, which means you have no policies on the books that threaten speech openly. gives you points. Like I just mentioned, Chicago principles, institutional neutrality can give you points. So this is a way of giving them a carrot to improve, do an initial improvement to their rankings. And then what we've found with schools that we have worked with is often you see those policy changes then filter into student survey responses, and you see their perceptions of the administration improve. You see their ability to discuss topics openly and honestly improve in light of places like Vanderbilt introducing an open dialogues program. One thing we saw very interestingly last year in our rankings data is so can't really say that I can't 100% say the open dialogues program caused these increases, but what we noticed in our data is, with the exception of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, when students were asked to identify which topics they found difficult to discuss on campus, we saw significant improvement on every other topic we ask about. We ask about 20 topics every year. So the only one that didn't improve significantly was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that made a lot of sense, and we're not going to get too upset about that. And I think that shows chance for improvement in how things can filter in to the survey responses down the road. So it takes a little while to turn the ship around if you've kind of ranked poorly. But I think through working with us, working with our policy reform team, it's definitely doable. And I'll turn it over to Nate now.
Okay, thank you so much, Sean. Nate, your work again has focused on faculty. What does the faculty experience on campus look like today? And relatedly, what are some of the problems facing higher education, some of the issues that are coming down the road?
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. And thank you all for being here today. So faculty on campus, we would think that maybe they're in a position of status, position of authority. And many of you in here are faculty on campus. And so, yeah, we see some nodding like, no, we're not. But faculty, in many ways, their experiences, at least as we see through our data, are highly similar to students. And just to echo what Sean said or mentioned or alluded to, like, I've been studying issues related to political diversity and discrimination in higher ed for going way back since I was an undergrad in college. And one of the consistent themes that I've found, and I feel like I then try to keep that in mind as we produce data at FIRE, is that so many people aren't convinced by data. So then my strategy is like, well, all right, well, I'm just going to continue collecting it until I bury you in this data, and it's impossible for you to ignore it. And so I feel like that's a philosophy that we take at FIRE. It's like, all right, well, we're just going to keep producing it, keep coming out with more and more and more and more, and eventually you can't ignore it anymore. And so we were able to conduct a nice large-scale faculty survey last year. We limited it to the first 55 colleges and universities that FIRE surveyed for the student rankings back in 2020. So these were kind of more elite, kind of flagship state universities, elite private universities across the nation. Robust sample of a little over 6,000 faculty. And faculty, by and large, were saying, like, no, I don't feel comfortable speaking up on campus. Of course, as with students, Israeli-Palestinian conflict was the top issue they said they couldn't speak openly and honestly about. And I figured that, okay, yes, faculty would probably say there's a little bit of discomfort there, but I didn't anticipate I think it was upwards of 70% of faculty said, no, I can't speak openly and honestly about that issue. Affirmative action, transgender rights and issues were also difficult topics. And this then also came out in what faculty were saying about self-censoring on campus. We had around around a fifth of faculty saying, like, when it comes to my research, I'm self-censoring in my research. I'm self-censoring in what I say online and what I'm teaching about in the conversations that I'm having with my students, with my colleagues, with the administration. We tried to drill down on, like, okay, why is this happening? And a couple of things that were popping. And then, of course, all of these things are worse with faculty who identify right of center. So center or leaning conservative. They're worried about damaging their reputation. Faculty are worrying about losing their job, particularly worried about losing their job if they're conservative and their colleagues were to find out that they are conservative, or even if they're moderate or independent and their colleagues find out that they're not dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. So very, very concerning dynamics among faculty. What was also surprising, too, is we looked at differences among faculty who had tenure and those who didn't. And faculty who did not have tenure were a bit more concerned about self-censorship, were a bit more concerned about speaking openly and honestly about a variety of issues. but the faculty with tenure or who are tenured and on the tenure track weren't that far behind. And we often think about tenure as being like, all right, once you get tenure, you're safe. You don't have to worry about anything. You can speak openly and honestly. And from our data, that's not what faculty with tenure appear to be doing. And I'd be curious to hear about the experiences of some of the faculty here in the room and what it's like for you. But I mean, talking with so many faculty, I can understand why. There's so many ways, even once you get tenure, you can get jammed up. I've heard from faculty in Florida saying, yeah, post-tenure review is just driving me. They're trying to get me out with post-tenure review, and you can be denied sabbatical, and you can be given terrible classes. Or I have had one professor, she was like, yeah, I was relocated. I was kicked out of being department chair, and I was moved to the math building. And she kind of liked that because then she didn't have to see her colleagues that hated her anymore. But I get it. Like, even with tenure, it's so hard, and there's so many ways that your colleagues can make life absolutely terrible for you. But so the data were quite concerning. But then, I mean, again, it's just illustrative of what we're seeing with the students on campus. And we've been doing a variety of national polls too. So we've tons of surveys on students, surveys on faculty, and we hope to continue those, including we're anticipating launching a law faculty survey this fall. We want to really see what's going on within our nation's law schools. But we've been asking Americans, like, okay, well, what do you see or what do you perceive about the climate on campus? And in particular, I've been drilling down into questions on, all right, well, and John talked about this, I think it was John yesterday, about confidence and trust in higher education. And of course, we see declines in confidence and trust. But where I've tried to get a little more nitty gritty and in kind of into the details of like, okay, why is your confidence or trust in colleges and universities dropping? And then I asked them, okay, what's your level of confidence? What percentage of faculty do you perceive as being liberal, conservative, or something else? And then some other follow-ups. And Americans who perceive the faculty as leaning more heavily to the left, so on average, Americans perceive about 50% of faculty to be liberal. I actually would be curious what you all would guess for the liberal to conservative ratio. And they estimate around 20-25% to be conservative. And some of you in here might be thinking like, oh, that's interesting, because yes, that is wildly inaccurate. So the greater the extremity, so the higher percentage of faculty they perceive as being liberal, the lower their confidence is. So you kind of see this curve that just goes down. But 70% of Americans in our surveys underestimate how liberal the faculty on average is. Because from a variety of data coming from Harry or from our faculty surveys, we see upwards of 60 to 70% liberal, and about like 10 to 12% identify as conservative. So then I followed this up with accurate info. Okay, here's what the faculty actually are. Now, like, what is your confidence in higher ed? Democrats are interesting. When they learn the accurate numbers, their confidence goes up. It's like, oh, okay, we're safe, we're good. But among moderates and Republicans, their confidence that's already low drops even further. So it's like, if Americans actually understood what the political dynamics were like in higher ed, how much lower would their confidence be? We have some recent data that then we kind of probed, like what specific reasons why. I haven't dug into that too much, but politics does come up as like, okay, what is the reason why you lack confidence? Well, it's because of the political dynamic on campus. So it's not great for faculty. It's not great for students. The American public is waking up to what's going on campus. And I mean, if you're faculty on campus, you see kind of issues and constraints arising related to the impending enrollment cliff. Student numbers are starting to drop off the cliff. And when all of these different pressures are coming in, the public's saying, we don't really trust what you all are doing. Politicians are stepping in, cutting funding. It's like, it's creating a kind of a pinnacle moment where if universities don't get their act together, others are already stepping in to try to reform things for them. But it's a crisis, kind of as I put it in a recent talk that I was giving. If any of you have seen the kids movie The Lion King, kind of picture the big Pride Rock and everything's green, but then in the middle of the movie, that the Pride Land turns into like a desolate wasteland. And I feel like we used to be green and everything's flourishing. We're kind of in the desolate wasteland, and if things don't improve, like, they're just going to continue to get worse. And Simba's not going to come back and save us and make everything better. But so it's a crisis of opportunity if higher ed will take it.
Thank you so Thank you so much, Nate. So now, for Laura, as Fire's Director of Policy Reform, please share with us how you and your team use the great data and the great reports that Sean, Nate, and their colleagues generate to work with colleges and universities to actually improve their policies and their culture.
Sure. So to pick up that metaphor, I guess we're trying to help people be Simba and save the day with this data. But to take a step back and talk to you a bit more about what I do at Fire, it is a bit different from what other attorneys do at Fire because it is not the sort of casework that you think of with Fire as far as being a watchdog organization and stepping in when we hear of potential rights violations of students and faculty members, but rather we are trying to work collaboratively with colleges to prevent those sorts of rights violations from happening and to try to set up a better environment so that not only are there not rights violations on the part of the institution, but that also there is just a better environment for open inquiry on campus. And so you have less of those factors of students self-censoring or faculty self-censoring and not pursuing their research. So a lot of that, as Sean talked about, is through the reform of policies, of course. So we take a look at the policies that are in place at an institution and make recommendations to get them in better line with the First Amendment. So they're protecting free speech rights. But everyone in this room knows that just getting the words on paper is not going to cut it. It may give people recourse if their rights are violated because they can say, you didn't follow your policy, and that puts them in a better position then. But it doesn't address those sorts of other concerns that create a restrictive environment for free speech and academic freedom. So a much more comprehensive approach needs to be taken. And so a big part of my job is just making that as easy as possible for schools to do and making that the path of least resistance. Because Nate was talking a bit about how there's all these various pressures on schools from the public, from legislatures, from their donors, and so we want to make sure that those competing voices do not win, and that we do have the better path for reform set forward for them. And we've all been kind of looking back at John Tomasi's keynote address, but I was also thinking about when he was saying that we have this sort of divide where some college administrators are thinking that this criticism is the result of a messaging issue and that they just have to reframe what's going on campus and to do this sort of window dressing to address that. And so then that there is another crowd of college administrators that are taking it more seriously, that do see that there is a problem that needs a comprehensive solution. And that really rings true to me. I've experienced that where sometimes I will be in meetings with college leadership, administrators, and I think to myself, someone told you to meet with us, or someone told you to address this issue. So you're checking a box. You're saying, all right, I met with the free speech people. I met with Fire. Check. Or I worked with Fire to adopt this free speech statement in the line with the Chicago principles. So my job is done. We're good. We've checked this box. Whereas really a better approach is to not only adopt that free speech policy statement, but to also share it with your students and teach them about it at orientation, but not just to stop at that week one, but also whenever there is an issue on campus, a controversy over speech, to be calling back to those principles and not just saying something like, we can't take action against this person because the First Amendment doesn't allow it or our policy statement doesn't allow it, but to actually explain why that is the case, why the First Amendment draws those lines and why that is a good thing. And so to teach students about those principles because they might not come to college with that already. And so that's really what we work to do, is to make that as easy as possible for folks. And I've been with Fire for about 10 years now. And so much of those early years I spent using that sort of anecdotal evidence that Sean was mentioning earlier of here is a student who doesn't feel like they can participate in activism because they're concerned about being punished, or here's a faculty member who is concerned about a collegiality policy and thinking that that could be used to infringe on their rights. So using these discrete examples along with bad policies in place. But again, that doesn't always persuade the administration that that is a real issue that they need to address. So being able to come to those meetings instead armed with survey data, it makes that a lot more convincing. And I have had some meetings where I've talked to folks about the rankings and they've bristled at them, and they, nobody wants to be ranked in the bottom, group of schools, certainly. And they've argued with the methodology, and they said, oh, I don't really think we should be ranked down there. And I've said, okay, fine. Let's set that aside. You don't have to agree with us on where we ranked you, but you can't really argue with these survey results. And these survey results, when you compare them to other schools, show that your students, say, are less likely to think that you as an administrator will defend their speech rights. Or your students say that they self-censor at a higher rate than your other peer institutions. And so when you're able to actually take that survey data, that gives them these discrete kind of ways that they need to take action, and then you can tailor your recommendations to those particular items. So if it is the case that students are self-censoring at a high rate, then that suggests that it would be better to teach them an orientation about how to talk across difference and to get away from that sort of tribalism mindset. Or if it's the case that students aren't sure what the administration's stance is on free speech, that they at a higher rate think that the school will not defend them if their rights are threatened, that sounds like they need to adopt a clear free speech statement and actually teach students about it. So you can pick at these survey results and actually tailor recommendations directly to them. And that's something that I've often recommended when I'm working with students and faculty, because they'll come to me with a laundry list of like 15 items that they say, this is wrong at our school, we want to work on this. And picking just a few items to focus on incrementally has been an approach that's worked well at schools where I've achieved reform at. And so generally that's the strategy that we've used, and it's been working, quite well. I found that makes it easier for schools to start working on reform, and we have seen incremental improvements reflected in the future survey results. So with that, I think we can turn it over to
Not quite yet. You have been admirably concise, so I'm going to take advantage of your expertise with at least one more round of questions before we open up to the audience. Sean, I do a lot of speaking on campuses, and I rarely hear from complaints from those who have been ranked highly, but I often hear complaints from those who are not ranked highly. I'm smiling because I remember, speaking of surveys, seeing a survey that was done of college and university presidents. And the bottom line I recall is they all thought that the free speech climate on their campus was really good, but it was really bad on everybody else's campus. So I have kind of two related questions for you, Sean. One is, when I speak on a campus, I find it really useful to dig into the details that you make available. And I'm not sure that everybody understands how completely transparent all of this detailed information is, down to a question-by-question breakdown of the survey answers and all of the other criteria, including every single incident of deplatforming or complained retaliation. So it's not, you don't have to take the top line results at face value. You can probe beneath them. And in addition to making it transparent, this wonderful group of experts and their colleagues make themselves personally available to engage in colloquies and discussions. And I remember the first time Harvard came out at the bottom, you had a whole webinar for people at Harvard who were interested in probing the details. But so my follow-up question has to do with an example from Harvard. Steve Pinker, who's a great friend and I think also on the advisory board of FIRE, wrote an otherwise excellent op-ed in the New York Times recently, in which he was saying, I'm somebody who's been complaining forever about Harvard's violations of free speech and academic freedom, but what the Trump administration is doing even worse. But in a parenthetical, he referred to FIRE's last place ranking of Harvard, and then he said, which doesn't even pass the laugh test. So I bristled at that. And using Harvard as an example, maybe you could talk both about the transparency in the process of engagement with critics and why it unfortunately does pass the laugh test.
So I will say, actually, I think this year Harvard's president has demonstrated much more of a spine than Columbia's in standing up to the Trump administration, and that likely will be reflected in the rankings this fall, where I think they will be ahead of Columbia and a handful of other schools. But in terms of Steve's comment, I think on one level, and this is as like a social scientist and not as like the advocate for an advocacy organization necessarily, but as a social scientist, I wouldn't get too hung up on exactly where you finish when you've been at the bottom. Like every year we've done it, or close to it, not always at the bottom, but not ever really close to the top. So I think the big indicator here is, and Steve knows this and admits it, it's there's a serious problem there. I'm sure it hurts in the press to the beating up of last place Harvard probably gets a little excessive, and that might be an example of how it's reached a level of hyperbole in certain press outlets. But at the end of the day, the take-home message is they have a problem and it's pretty serious, and it's reflected in the data. I mean, sure, is the reason they're at the bottom primarily a result of lots of speech controversies that didn't go well? Yeah, that's probably the primary reason. But even when you take those out and just say, okay, we're going to ignore this, and you look at just the survey data, they're still pretty mediocre. I think the end of the day, whether last or not, they do have a serious problem. And then another criticism I know Steve has, and I don't think this was necessarily in the op-ed, but he said it in other places, in other conversations. And it's the anecdotal one. Well, when I talk to all these professors at other schools, it just sounds so much worse there. It's okay, but we survey the students, not the professors, as Nate was kind of pointing out. It's kind of harder to survey the professors, and I doubt if we sent a ranking survey to professors every year, I doubt they'd be very happy with us, because they would probably think it's overkill surveying them year after year. That's just my experience with it. I think as a former academic who taught plenty of classes, that's how I would feel too. I don't know if I'd want to repeatedly answer a survey every year. I think at the end of the day, I just think, Harvard still, it's pretty clear they have a problem. I think a lot of people at Harvard know this, but I do think there are some encouraging signs over the past year, and certainly over the past 6 months.
On the general question of any member of a faculty or staff or administrator or student who is interested in learning more details and perhaps then segueing to work with Laura and her team.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder on that. So if you go to rankings.thefire.org, you can see, you get the whole rankings list, but then you can explore the data in more detail. It gives you the results at each school. So you can see the top line results at each school. So how all of the students overall at Harvard responded to questions, but then that gets broken down by the different demographic information we collect, which there's a wealth of. Thing that's exciting about the data, and we will happily share it with anybody interested in analyzing it, diving deeper into it too. If you have the chops to do that and would like the raw data file, you just email data@thefire.org and we'll provide it. But what's really exciting about it is we have, like I said, we surveyed close to 300,000 undergraduates, but because of the sheer number of students we survey each year, we have large samples of groups that generally you're not going to have a large sample of in pretty much any other survey or study. So we have a lot of gender non-conforming students every year. So this could be trans students, non-binary students, etc. We have a lot of like quirky political minority type groups. Like there's plenty of black conservatives and female conservatives in the sample, which I don't think you're necessarily going to get in a 300-person study or a sample of 800 students nationwide. So just the kind of what you can do with the data goes far beyond just us calculating the rankings and kind of looking at top line results and helping Laura out in getting her foot in the door with some of these administrators. So it's a very rich data set that we're happy to share and work with you on any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. And I do recall that Greg Lukianoff, the CEO of FIRE, has long recommended as a constructive step that can be taken by those campus leaders who are committed to these issues is why not conduct your own survey? Bring together, you've got the experts on your own faculty. You can bring together, hopefully, an interdisciplinary and ideologically diverse group to collaborate in designing something that then you have your own buy-in into it.
And we have actually done that with a group at the University of Wisconsin system, both for a student survey, and Nate's now working with them on a faculty one.
Fabulous. So, Nate, I'd love to hear more about that. And my other follow-up question for you is, I remember looking at the faculty's most recent faculty survey. In terms of the one question that really jumped out at me, which Laura already alluded to, is the extent to which faculty members, I think Laura is speaking about students, faculty members believe that the administration will have their backs if they get into a controversial situation. And what was disturbing to me was that even the University of Chicago, which has outstanding policies and practices, the percentage of faculty who felt that the administration would not have their back was disturbingly high. So how do we fix that situation?
Yeah, great questions. First on the UW system, what's been really neat about that is the faculty survey hasn't been run yet, but the student survey, much of the top lines from that is consistent with what we found in our data, specifically our data from the University of Wisconsin system. So it's great when leaders on different campuses are able to run surveys of their own. Usually the response rates are much higher. You're getting not only students, but a lot of staff and administrators and faculty. And so you're getting a better picture of what the broader campus dynamic is like. And I mean, beyond UW, there's been other campuses where we've consulted on kind of questionnaire design, different questions to ask, response options, how to recruit and whatnot. And so if anybody is interested in doing something like that on your own campus, I mean, I'm sure you have many experts in-house, but FIRE is also always happy to consult or give feedback. And all of our questions and materials we always make available to anybody interested. We love people to use the questions, and then you have a point of comparison. But in the faculty surveys, faculty do report concern over whether or not the administration will have their back and defend them if a controversy arises and their speech is threatened. And we actually just finished collecting data. So Sean mentioned our Students Under Fire, Scholars Under Fire database. We conducted a survey targeted to faculty who are in our Scholars Under Fire database from an incident where they were canceled or their speech was threatened or they were fired or terminated or whatnot within the last 4 years. So it's a very small population, but we wanted to get a better sense of what these faculty were experiencing on campus. And by and large, one of the key takeaways from this data was alienation. These faculty who came under fire for their speech, they reported that they received essentially no public support from people at their own campus, which is just devastating. Like, these faculty basically were hung out to dry by their colleagues, by their administration on their campus. They received more public support from people not at their campus, ostensibly because maybe people outside of their university didn't have anything to lose. But I mean, the levels, they reported like 65% reported experiencing emotional distress. And then that was kind of the high point. And then depression, they had to seek psychological counseling. They felt alienated. 20% lost their job. And so when I see this, kind of going back to the other faculty data I talked about, it's like, oh, well, maybe it makes sense that faculty are keeping their mouths shut, because who would want to experience that stuff? Who would want to step on a landmine and then, all right, well, you're going to lose your job. Everybody hates you. Maybe even your family and relatives. Some of the faculty said their families stopped talking to them. I mean, the only people they could talk to was a pastor. So it's really, it's concerning. And so I mean, it's easier said than done, but I would hope that as some people see this data, maybe administrators take heart and like, oh, well, I need to speak up and be more vocal in speaking out and defending maybe not the actual views that are being expressed by a person, but their right to say it. Like, well, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to defend your right to say this. And at FIRE, we often talk about, like, well, you do that because it might be your speech later that's the speech that's being targeted or censored or is unpopular. I feel like I kind of danced around it, but I hope I got at what you're asking a little bit.
Very, very, very helpful. Thank you. Laura, we would love, so I know a lot of the work that you do, understandably, is confidential. So we know there's a lot more positive reforms in the making, thanks to Laura and her teams, than can be publicly disclosed at any particular point. But can you give us a couple fairly recent, helpful, inspiring examples?
Yeah, sometimes they want our advice, but they do not want us to say publicly that we are giving them advice, because that would be admitting there's a problem. And you know, that's unfortunate, but I'm in it for the free speech, not for the glory. So that's fine. We do that. But there are some schools that we've worked with that have wanted to shout it from the rooftops, because that's a part of their overall strategy of talking. You know, if we talk about how we're strengthening free speech at our school, then students will start to believe it, and faculty will as well. And one example of that rose from the rankings was the University of South Carolina, when they saw that they were ranked quite low, reached out to us and said, you know, what can we do here? What can we do to improve this? Not just for the sake of the rankings, but also to address what seemed like a real issue there. And so we first worked on revising their policies that were in place. They had some quite restrictive policies on the books so that would improve. But as I was saying earlier, of course, just getting that policy right on paper is not going to do it. So they also adopted a free speech policy statement that they shared with students. And again, they really shouted that from the rooftops to make clear they were embarking on this sort of campaign of reform. And so in the next year of the rankings, the survey results showed improvement. So it wasn't just that they improved in our rankings because that speech code rating went up. The majority of the improvement came from the survey results themselves, that students were showing that they felt more confident speaking on campus. And we've also seen, and I don't know if this will be shown in the next round of survey results, but there was a controversy on USC's campus over this past year because a group it was an invited group, right, Sean, that was going to be hosting a roast of Kamala Harris with a vulgar offensive title. And so they were planning on having this event, and a lot of folks both on and off campus were pushing back on that, and not just pushing back on it, but asking for the speakers to be disinvited and for the event to be canceled. And it was pretty high profile. It was highly publicized, but the university didn't just say, no, we're not going to cancel it. They actually pointed to their free speech policy statement and explained why, under their principles, they were not going to cancel this event. And so that reflects a more comprehensive approach as far as not just getting the policies right on paper, but actually explaining that to the campus community and following through on those principles. So that's one example that we were really heartened by. But I think that key to this can really be strong leadership on this. So another example, happily we'll have the chance to hear from her later today, President Bylock at Dartmouth College. When she came on, it was just, I think 2 years ago she started at Dartmouth, and made it a clear, big part of her new presidency to prioritize free speech and academic freedom. Part of that was working with FIRE to improve policies, but they've also been focusing on a lot of programming as far as having events where faculty who are a part of the same discipline but approach it from different perspectives, I wouldn't call it a debate, but engage in dialogue to model to students that you can have dialogue on challenging topics, and that not only is that allowed, but it's encouraged because it strengthens everyone's positions ultimately. So I think that strong leadership on this, that takes this seriously, that really engages with survey data, whether it's produced by FIRE or themselves, is key to reform here.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to say, because I think most of us, as Laura alluded to, do relate to FIRE as the firebrand litigator that has a great track record in court, that this approach, that Laura's work and the data gathering and reporting that feeds it from Sean and Nate and their colleagues, is very completely collaborative, completely constructive, very much in the spirit of Heterodox Academy, of we love universities, we want to help them fulfill their unique and essential roles in society. And I speak here with a little bit of experience because, as Laura will recall, for a variety of reasons, I had the opportunity to be a fly on the wall as she and a couple of her colleagues were consulting with I'll retain the confidentiality of the particular institution. But very frank, candid, but completely constructive, trusting, candid conversations with the president and the general counsel, and really working together and wrestling through some very challenging problems. So I hope all of you will see FIRE as a great resource and ally and supporter for all the great work that all of you are doing. And so now it is time to turn it over to audience Q&A, and I'll call on you in the order in which I see your hands, 1 and 2, please.
As an aside about Harvard, they
do you mind saying who you are? I think everybody would be interested.
Well, I'm Quentin Langley. I'm the moderator of Heterodox NYC. So as an aside about Harvard, Steve Pinker should probably acknowledge that about 10,000 of the faculty are less famous and more vulnerable than he is. But I wanted to endorse what Laura was saying about the modeling of good behavior being at least as important as the excellent data that FIRE is gathering. One of the things I've been pushing on universities is the idea of sponsoring debate contests and debate scholarships as part of their recruitment. A lot of universities are looking, after Supreme Court decisions, how to get more minority students. If you sponsor debates in high schools that are in minority areas, you can increase your recruitment of minority students and at the same time model behaviour of open inquiry and open dialogue.
That reminds me of, I don't know if anyone is here from an Arizona institution, but the Arizona Board of Regents holds an annual debate competition where they bring students from each of the 3 universities in the state, and their debates on free speech topics, which is neat. I recently got the chance to judge some of the competition, and I think that's a great approach as far as modeling that sort of good behavior. But also on the note of Harvard and recruitment, I was encouraged by the fact one of the steps they've recently taken to try to turn the ship around was they are asking students applying to Harvard now, Harvard College at least, I believe, that they how would they respond to a situation where they have to engage with speech they disagree with? So I think that's a great step as far as looking for students who are interested in engaging with others who have different views and who have that intellectual curiosity and that intellectual humility. I think that's really important to look for.
Next.
Yes, my name is Joseph E.
Congratulations again.
Yes. People actually ask me where my university was. I said it's Korea, not Japan. Right. So moderator, Heterodox, East Asia Community. My question is, how do you deal with very difficult cases, such as the University of Florida law student, Preston Dansky? The university recently suspended him for saying, like, we need to abolish Jews by any means necessary. And so where do you draw the line? And how are you dealing with this case right now?
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, for me, I always think we're not defending the speech, we're defending the principle. And so it's not about the content of the speech, it's that in the United States, we've all sort of decided I'm kind of paraphrasing I think it was the concurrence in Matal v. Tam, which was a case about an Asian rock group who had chosen a slur word for their name, the Slants, because they wanted to reclaim that name, and they were denied the trademark that they applied for. And in that concurrence, they spoke about how we in the United States have decided that we are going to grapple with speech that we hate, because suppressing that and allowing the government to suppress that would mean that we ourselves are not free to speak. And so I think that that's a really important principle to defend. So it's really not about that hateful speech itself. It's about defending that principle. But I don't know if anyone else has comment.
But then there's a distinction with fighting words, right?
Sure.
So when you said, like, we need to abolish Jews by any means necessary, do you consider that fighting words?
No, because it's not, it's almost closer to incitement to violence, but it doesn't quite meet that standard because it's speculative. It's saying in a general sense, we should do this. It's not saying to a crowd of people who have the torches and the pitchforks, let's go do this. Yes. Yes. So it doesn't get to that line. I don't know, to be honest with you. Again, I'm not on the casework team, so I'm not sure about that particular case. I'd have to follow up on that with you. But in the general sense, no, that doesn't sound like it reaches incitement to violence.
I'd be happy to discuss that in more detail. I'm going to go next, and just in the order in which I see you, and you, please, and
Ian Hutchinson,
Steve.
Massachusetts Institute of Technology, co-president of the Council on Academic Freedom. This is mostly to Sean. I'm concerned about the uncertainty in the aspects of the data and ranking that come from incidents as opposed to surveys. And in particular, it seems to me there's considerable ambiguity about aspects of time, place, and manner restrictions, which are not necessarily, in my opinion, things which should be constrained by First Amendment rights necessarily, because they're in private spaces. And secondly, in respect of the Chicago principles, if a university faculty like ours adopts a set of free speech principles, which we have, but that declines to mention the Chicago principles, does that qualify, and how do you decide whether it qualifies or not?
So the tracking of the Chicago principles on FIRE's website, I'll take that one first. It's mainly adoptions of the Chicago principles, but it is or similarly worded statements. So those would get a similarly worded statement would be evaluated by the legal team. And if it passed their muster, they would be added to that list. And so that would count as endorsing the Chicago principles. On the incidents, it certainly is, we know that that's like an imperfect indicator of things. We're certainly not, we know it's like kind of like some of the things we're tracking is that there's a tip of the iceberg element to it. Most likely with student speech, there's probably a lot more violations of student speech than we're able to record and track. I mean, we're privately aware of more incidents through the casework that we can't publicize yet. But the way we validate those is actually, it's a fairly, I think it's a strong process for what we're trying to do. Like we have a multi-person panel of the research department that identifies potential incidents. We then review this with our campus reform advocacy team. And so a lawyer goes over each individual case and makes a decision as to whether there is a First Amendment violation there or not. So we wouldn't, like if there's a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction placed on a speaking event and the university either denies a group the ability to invite a speaker or says, no, we can't hold this event now, and here's why, this wouldn't make it into the database because the review would say effectively that's a reasonable time, place, manner restriction. So school wouldn't get dinged by that. On a broader sense, I mean, yeah, it's a valid criticism to kind of point out that we're probably going to hear about like every incident like this that happens at Harvard, and might not hear about it when it happens at, I don't know, Boise State or something like that. And certainly it's more likely that speakers are going to probably jump at the opportunity to speak at Harvard, and maybe traveling to Boise isn't the top of their agenda. So Harvard opening itself up more for these types of things to happen. But I think the flip side of that then is though, well, the more incidents that we've recorded and had, and we can see how you've responded to them, I think we're getting a better sense of how you probably are going to respond to them in the future. So having a larger sample size there and seeing that a school repeatedly maybe doesn't handle these incidents so well gives us a sense of what their climate is like a little bit, and that it's not a very good one.
Across the aisle.
My name's Andrew Gardner. I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of Puget Sound, Tacoma, Washington. Private institution with a large price tag, and I think like many sort of middling liberal arts institutions like mine, struggling to attract as many students as it's capable of handling. You briefly mentioned the kind of demographic narrowing that all universities face, and I mean that's an especially pressing issue for universities like mine, which does not have an express sort of commitment to free expression and open inquiry principles. So I guess I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more. Is there any market benefit that you guys have been able to see for this turn? Because that would be a particularly effective weapon to have in my toolkit as I speak with the various deciders in our institutional future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say, unfortunately, we haven't been surveying on it long enough to be able to tell if there is a market benefit. I mean, when I look at how Americans are responding to a lot of these questions, I would say on average it appears that there likely is, that if a university can do something to convey information that, hey, no, we are trying to welcome diverse viewpoints here and create a space where students can really come and learn. That I think that would be received well. I mean, now, unfortunately, a lot of Americans are also concerned about rising costs and student debt and things of that nature. So at a smaller liberal arts school like that is going to be a squeeze and definitely create a unique pickle of a situation. But I think that when I look at the data, I don't see any reason why trying to be proactive about conveying a better climate on campus, how that could hurt a school.
Steve,
Yeah, hi. So thank you for everything.
please introduce yourself.
What's that?
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. And my name is Steve. I'm from the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, which actually kind of leads to my question, because we're a smaller campus, we're not the flagship, right? And so I was wondering if you guys have ever considered, because I know this is probably just a manpower issue, right? You guys can't do surveys on every campus all the way across the country. But have you ever thought of doing system rankings, state by state? Because I could see that being good for a couple reasons. I mean, one, you can always get a little competition going, right? But also, when you're talking to state legislators or like regents who are thinking more in terms of the system, I feel like it's easier to talk about, like, this is a statewide issue, right? People are going to have, in our state, Boulder's going to have people who really love it, really probably don't like it very much, but it becomes, a little polarizing there. But if they say this is a statewide issue and here's a statewide ranking, have you guys ever considered that? I don't even know if that's possible in terms of, labor, but any insight there?
Yeah, so the surveying of different schools isn't necessarily a person power issue for fire. It's a financial one. And then it also factors in whether or not our survey partner, College Pulse, has a feasible sample on a campus, right? So it's very possible that they have a feasible sample at UC Colorado Springs, but we only have, it's not necessarily cheap to survey 260 schools a year and targeting I think this year we got about 68,000 student responses. So our development team does a very good job of finding people who aren't interested in specific schools to kind of expand the pool. So it's not necessarily a person power issue in terms of which schools we survey. It's more of like a feasibility financial one. In terms of the state system question, it is something we've had discussions about. We're actually revamping the rankings website for the launch this fall. And it's likely going to include state pages. So this is a little different from a system ranking, because the University of North Carolina system would be on the North Carolina state page, but so would Duke and Wake Forest and any other schools that I think we have Davidson in there too, so they'd be on that page as well. But in terms of systems, I mean, we do have a handful of them where we've surveyed most, if not all, of the campuses, and I can say that you certainly do see differences. University of Arizona, the state of Arizona, and then that system, and the state of North Carolina system, most of the schools tend to do fairly well. The UC California system, not so much. I don't know if that's necessarily surprising to many in this room, but yeah, it's something that we're discussing, considering. I think at the very least we might do state system reports this year or in the future when we have enough schools to do so. So yeah.
Now I'm moving back to the next.
Could I just add quickly to
so
that?
Sorry.
No, just to jump in. So beyond the rankings themselves, we also definitely engage in that sort of comparing schools in a system advocacy, because it as you suggest, it definitely works. And one school that was in our rankings, Georgia Tech, reached out when it was ranked pretty low to ask how they could improve their speech codes. And so we worked with them on speech code reform. And then several other schools in the University of Georgia system, even some that weren't a part of the rankings, we also started working with them because they also wanted to improve their policies and had heard from their colleagues at Georgia Tech that we provided that sort of consultation for free. And so that does have that sort of ripple effect. And I mean, Sean brought up the University of North Carolina system. That was one where where we started working with a few schools, we improved their policies, and then it got to the point where there's something like 17 schools in the UNC system, and nobody wanted to be the one school that didn't have the green light rating on their policies from fire. And so it had a great impact to be able to compare those schools within a system. So it's something we definitely do on the policy front. Even when all those schools aren't a part of the rankings, we're able to leverage that.
Excellent points. Thank you. I see two hands in the next row. So it's the two corner people, right? Somebody wearing black and somebody wearing flowers.
Okay. Phoebe Steiners, Cornell University. The question I have is about how to think about things that influence free speech climate that are coming from outside the university. And I mean, I'm not saying that that's the reason for problems at the university, but certainly an influence. So right now we have students who are afraid of speech because they're afraid of being deported. We have outside activists that target people who've done political speech. Students are afraid to speak openly because they're scared of being canceled on social media. So these are things that aren't directly under the university's control, but how do we think about that in terms of how to improve climate?
I have one thought on that. I think that strong leadership from schools can help ease those concerns. One school, and I don't know if they apply it well, so don't quote me on saying they're doing a great job on it, but just from their website at least, the University of Illinois has a great site on its website that walks through what they will do if one of their faculty members is targeted by an online mob. And so they're thinking, these are people outside of the campus. And so it walks through step by step of, we'll make sure that, of course, the campus police are contacted, we'll get security involved, we'll reach out to the students in their class, we'll move their class if it seems like that would be better for safety, but we'll also put out a statement to the community that's affirming their academic freedom right to engage in this sort of work, whatever that attack might be based on. And so publicly saying we're standing up for this person. And again, I don't know if they apply it well, but at least the procedure looks like it's in good shape. So I think that schools, even if they have an institutional neutrality policy, I think schools can stand up and say we are standing behind these people who are reasonably feeling chilled right now from various threats outside of campus. I see Sean reaching.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, I would agree with Laura on the leadership part. There's a few examples from this year itself that will make the rankings, and they are going to be, it's bonuses for the schools. It's schools that have made very strong public statements defending their students that have been arrested and attempted to be deported. And actually Harvard defending some of their students, their president got them some points there. So.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time, so let's take a couple questions in a row. First you, and then Jackie, and then back there. Sorry, you. So we'll hear your three questions, and then panelists can concisely respond to which parts they want to.
Thank you. I'm Francesca Schuler. I'm the new exec director of Dialogue Vanderbilt. And I was curious, have you surveyed parents and employers as part of understanding expectations on going in and then coming out, and their thoughts on how important this is to be addressed to other issues that we're asking for?
Thank you. Jackie? More question for now? Yes. Yes.
I'm Lee Sherry Morales. I'm from the University of Tennessee System. We have state mandated legislation around divisive concepts, and so it's prompted the administration of a survey across the UT system, 5 campuses, findings were kind of not really significant, but we've used it to just like check the box and say we must be good. The survey was really heavily focused on policy, but really not addressing some of the nuances of self-censorship. And I'd like kind of to hear some more response related to that, like what you found to be the connection between policy and self-censorship.
Why don't I take this? Nate, you want to start?
I was just going to jump in. I know if anybody in the room has been doing anything on their campus to advocate for Chicago principles, institutional neutrality, other reform, could you raise your hand? So there's a lot of people in this room and at this conference that are making efforts at their campuses, and so I really hope. I mean, so to the Columbia, the woman from Columbia, like we would love to talk to you about that after. And there's so many others here who are making strides at their campuses. So I hope that this will come up in other conversations too, because we have our experiences, but each campus is a little bit different. So I hope that everyone will be able to glean something from a lot of other colleagues. Just want to throw that in. But before.
And to add to that, a kind of reluctant or a kind of sad word of encouragement, but this reform can be slow. So some of these stories that I've told today, it was not just, a signing a paper and immediately they started doing a great job. Some of these took quite a while. And my casework colleagues will sometimes say, Laura, you met with these people months ago. You said they were going to change this policy or adopt this practice. Why hasn't this happened yet? Because they work at a much faster pace than me when they're defending someone who's about to, be suspended or something. And so I say, have patience. I trust that they are working this through their process. They're adopting the policy slowly. So I would encourage just to stick with it, because I think that sometimes the pace can be slow, but it does result in real reform eventually.
Jump into the others. We haven't surveyed parents or employers. That would be fascinating to see what the trickle down effects are. If they're seeing, if a campus initiates a program, do they see that in the students that they're hiring? So yeah, we haven't done that, but could be unique. And I mean, if you have specific, we'd love to talk about, like, if there's questions that we have that might be useful or helpful to incorporate into the nuance, to capture the nuances of self-censorship.
I'll just add to what Nate said about the other survey populations. We have not done parents or employers directly. Obviously, we have national data. We run a national speech index every quarter. So within that, there's probably some stuff. But our survey partner, College Pulse, their primary work, the free speech rankings that they do with us is like somewhat of a passion project of the founder and CEO. Their primary thing is actually providing information to employers on college students, like prospective employers, and kind of assessing college students on their attitudes and their fit. So it's possible that they actually have some of this information that we'd be able to look at.
We have time for one more question. First hand that I saw, the gentleman with the glasses.
I'm Brian Gentry from the University of South Carolina. Glad to hear of our positive movement there. I am curious about the mismatch between people underestimating the ideological imbalance on campuses and where their confidence moves when they find out what it's really like. And I'm curious, is there a correlation between the individual's political leanings and how accurate they are in guessing or estimating? Like, is a conservative more likely to notice the ideological imbalance than someone else, for example?
Yeah, conservative Americans are more accurate, but they're still quite inaccurate. So basically, all Americans. We'll just go by party. Republicans, independents, Democrats all perceive faculty to be majority liberal, but then where the variation is the percent conservative. Conservatives are the closest, but they're still wildly off. In terms for confidence, once they receive accurate information, confidence overall goes down, but it's primarily driven by Republicans and independents. Confidence among Democrats, on average, goes up a little bit once they receive accurate info.
I'm so sorry that we couldn't get to all of the questions. Thanks to our panelists who may be generous enough. I'm sure we'll be enthusiastic about speaking to all of you here or elsewhere throughout the conference. Thank you so much.